Well, we're back in the shop again working on this diesel. So today I plan to take the injection pump off and take the front cover off because I want to see how this thing is timed. I'm not sure where it is right now. It didn't run super well when I had it on the stand, and it looks like it may have been apart before because that's clear silicone on the tower on both sides. So I think this has been apart at least once, sometime in its life. So it may be out of time. So what I want to do today is I want to roll this thing up to top dead center at the top of the compression stroke. And then I want to pull it apart and see where the marks are. So it's possible, I don't think the pump's 180 degrees out, but it's possible it's off a tooth or two. And I want to see if it is or not. So I'm going to take this off in a specific order to find that out. Now, you might be thinking, what do you mean by 180 out? Is it possible to get an injection pump 180 out? Absolutely. So, you've probably heard that expression 180 out before. Probably when working on a gas engine of some sort, after doing major work like cylinder heads or an intake manifold, anything that has to have the distributor removed and reinstalled gives you the possibility of being quote-unquote 180 out. And basically it's a side effect of the 4-stroke or 4-cycle engine. And what's going on is on a 4-stroke engine there's 2 top dead centers. So if I roll this thing over and I line this engine up, and this is a diesel but it's still a 4-stroke engine, and line up the marks, am I at top dead center? Well, maybe. I got a 50% shot at it. So what's going on here is, let's use a gas engine as an example. On a gas engine, the spark has to happen at the top of the compression stroke, right before top dead center, because that's where the compressed fuel air mixture is during the 4 cycles. So we have intake, compression, power, and exhaust. So intake, piston goes down. Compression, piston comes back up. That's one rotation of the crankshaft. Power, piston goes down. Exhaust, piston comes back up. That's the second rotation of the crankshaft. So the crankshaft has to rotate twice for one power cycle on one cylinder on a 4-stroke engine. And because of that, the camshafts in these engines rotate at half crankshaft speed. So when you pull these things apart, you'll find that the crankshaft gear has half as many teeth as the camshaft gear does. So the camshaft is rotating half as fast as the crank. Crankshaft is rotating twice as fast as the cam. This is true on a diesel engine, diesel 4-stroke, or gas 4-stroke. Now there are diesel 2-strokes, as in Detroit's. And on those, this doesn't apply, because there's a power stroke on every up and down of the piston or every rotation of the crankshaft. But on a 4-stroke, that's not true. Camshaft rotates half the speed of the crankshaft. So, well, how do we find out if it's on the compression stroke? Well, there's lots of ways to do it. On the gas engine, you can screw a compression gauge in the number 1 cylinder and bump the starter around or rotate it around with a breaker bar, and when you see the compression gauge needle start to move, you know you're on the compression stroke. Then you can keep running this crankshaft clockwise, get to the top of the compression stroke, you know you're top dead center. Line your marks up, you're good to go. Obviously I can't do this on this, and diesels are a little bit more difficult because they don't have spark plugs, so it takes an adapter to go in the glow plug hole, which is really tiny, and there's a bazillion different thread pitches and sizes for glow plugs. I don't have that little item yet, but I'll have it soon. But there's still a way to do it. So first off, you have to determine what's number one cylinder? 99% of the time, number one cylinder is going to be the bank of cylinders that are the farthest forward on the engine. So you can see on this diesel, that's the passenger side of this engine. That bank is farther forward than all the other cylinders. That doesn't always hold true. Pontiac V8s are backward. I think they probably did that so Chevrolet technicians suddenly find themselves working at Pontiac dealers wouldn't get confused. So if you look at a Pontiac, which I believe is set up just like this actually, the left bank of cylinders, which on a Chevy that would be number one. On a Chevy that bank is further forward than the passenger side bank, but on the Pontiac it's the rearward bank of cylinders, but they still call that number one. So that's backwards. Doesn't hold true on Pontiacs, but on just about everything else, the forward bank of cylinders is where you find number one. So on this one, it's that cylinder right there. And you can see our two hydraulic lifters down in that valley. Now we need to know which of those hydraulic lifters is the intake and which is the exhaust. Easiest way to do that is look at the cylinder head. So there's our cylinder head, and this is number one cylinder for the driver's side bank of cylinders. And you can see that the very first valve is a small valve, and the next one in line is a big valve. Small valves are always exhaust. The bigger valve is always the intake. You can double check that by just looking at the runner. You see the runner for the intake matches up with that valve. So the very first rocker arm, the very first hydraulic lifter on this engine is an exhaust. So that one right there. The very next lifter is an intake. So theoretically, if we crank this engine around clockwise, which is its normal rotation, and we watch these lifters, we should be able to figure out when we're at the correct stroke in our 4 cycles. So intake, exhaust, or intake, compression, power, exhaust. So we want to be at the top of the intake stroke. Or I'm sorry, at the top of the compression stroke. So intake piston moving down, compression piston moving up. Both valves closed, otherwise we wouldn't have compression. So when the intake valve closes, that's the correct cycle. We just need to run our marks up, line them up, and we should be good. So let's do that. Okay, here's our 2 hydraulic lifters. The first one is an exhaust, the next one is an intake. So we're going to rotate this thing around, piston's going down, intake valve is closing. So that was our intake stroke. Now the piston's coming back up. This is our compression stroke. Now I'm just going to line the marks up. Now my marks are lined up. That's at the top of the compression stroke, that's TDC. Our marks are lined up. If I can continue to run this balancer around clockwise, what we would see is the very first hydraulic lifter would start to come up, and that would be our exhaust stroke. Okay, next step is to pull the injection pump off. Pulling the injection pump off, you need a special wrench. You can make one. All you need to do is you take a normal 9/16 or 14 millimeter and you grind it down to make it thinner, because it's kind of tight in the back of the bore here. Right back here. Let me throw some gloves on, start tearing this thing apart. This little cover right here is how we access the bolts that hold the injection pump gear to the injection pump itself. Three little 12-point bolts. I'm going to go ahead and take those out now. If I can figure out what size they are. Eight millimeters. Or in truth, it's probably 5/16 12 point. 8 millimeter will work. So when you're taking one of these things apart, you can pull the injection pump by doing it this way, by taking the nuts off, these three bolts, and then slide the injection pump out, and the gear won't move. It'll stay locked between the top of the tower and the next gear in line, which would be the cam. And I want to do it that way because I'm curious to make sure that this thing, or see if it's out of time. It might be a tooth or two. There's a dowel pin on the hub of the ejection pump that lines everything up. So there's no possible way you could get the pulley on the injection pump wrong, as long as that dowel pin is in place. There we go. Our injection pump is off. See that notch? That's where the dowel pin goes. Set this aside. Something else to be aware of is before you loosen the nuts on the injection pump, you need to mark it. So you mark where the injection pump and the housing meet. So on reassembly, I can line up those marks, which will get me close. Every 30 thousandths of rotation on the injection pump is 2 degrees of injection pump timing. So I wouldn't want to hunt around for a setting that would allow this thing to start and run. This will speed things up. Now I'm going to pull the front cover off. Take this big thick washer out and we'll get the bolt back in there just a couple turns, and I'm going to push against that with the harmonic balancer remover. And so I don't damage the threads in the crankshaft. supposed to use an impact to do that. I just go slow. Missed one. Okay, there's our bolts. Gotta be careful, I don't want to move that gear at all. So I just want that to sit right there until I get the front cover off. And I'm going to have to loosen some of these oil pan bolts. Whoa, don't move. There it goes. And we're on. So you can see that little Y is aligned with the cam gear Y. So this was in time, it was okay. And then down at the bottom here, there's two dots. A dot and a dot. That's the crank gear, and then that's the cam gear. And then below that, which is kind of irrelevant, this does not have to be timed, that's the oil pump. The oil pump's driven off the crankshaft. But you can see that 50% ratio there. That crank gear has half the teeth of that cam gear. So this has to turn twice for that to turn once. And then when this turns once, that turns once. They're in the same rotation schedule. The camshaft and the IP turn at the same rate. So if I were to turn this crankshaft one turn, that dot would be at the top, that Y would be at the bottom, and I would be 180 degrees out, even though the marks on the balance are lined up. And then the same is true up here. If I put this on upside down, for whatever reason, that would be out of time, 180 degrees, and I'd have to turn the crankshaft one turn to get it back in relation. So the takeaway here is you always need to know what cycle the engine is on. So you need to know what the camshaft is doing. And you need to get it top dead center on the compression stroke, not the exhaust stroke. And if you do that, if you take those precautions ahead of time before you tear anything apart, you usually not get into trouble. So that's why I did it this way. I wanted to line everything up, make sure I was at the top of the compression stroke, take it all apart, see how everything was lined up. And now when I clean this thing up and put it back together, I will do the same exact thing. I'll put it top dead center on the compression stroke, and I'll put everything back together. Line up all my marks. Once I get everything bolted down, I don't have to worry about it after that. So, but that's basically it. Now this, like I said, most people that deal with this 180 out stuff are probably more familiar with it on a gas engine. The gas engine, if you rotate the crank one turn, your distributor will rotate half a turn. That's 180 degrees. That's where that expression came from. So once again, you have to make sure you're top dead center on the compression stroke. So you rotate that crankshaft one more time. Now you're back to top dead center. That's it. I'll keep cleaning this thing up, keep tearing it down. Thanks for watching.